Welcome to my little cultural studies podcast. I had to shift formats last minute because the video I originally took was unusable, and my extremely bad senioritis meant that I decided to simply shift mediums and make my own life easier. So with that out of the way, let's get started. What am I doing? Well, it's pretty simple really. I want to look at the history of the honorifics Mrs., Miss, and Ms., and see how their use has developed and changed meaning throughout history. Along with that, I want to see how the use of honorifics this way relates to feminist concepts and gender theory. Like I said, it's pretty simple. Just a disclaimer, I will be using some complicated words that I do not fully understand, and I would like you to please don't crucify me, because I will probably get some of the definitions at least slightly wrong. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Webster's dictionary defines a woman as an adult female person. A simple enough definition, but so much nuance and complexity is lost when you simplify the concept of womanhood to a 4-word-long explanation. Instead of trying to define a woman in the modern day, let's look at the word's etymology. In Old English, the term man just meant a person, male or female. The word for a man as we understand it today was were, which survives in the word werewolf, or quite literally man-wolf. There was also a female equivalent in the term with, and even though it sounds like the modern word wife, it had no relation to marital status at the time. You can somewhat see this in the expression old wives' tale, which is understood to mean women in general as opposed to specifically married women. Together, were-man and with-man were perfectly, logically, and structurally equal in language. Spoiler alert, that did not stay the same. Were-man simply became man, and with-man, which was pluralized to women, became woman or women. At this point, an argument could be made that women and men are still functionally equivalent from a language standpoint, and that neither truly has power over the other purely by language. Thankfully, or not, there's so much more history. Mrs. and Miss both come from mistress, but developed apart to mean different things, that being a married or unmarried woman, respectively. We'll get to Miss in a bit, but right now we're going to focus on Mrs. In the 18th century, around the time of its introduction, Mrs. was applied to many unmarried ladies that were both young and old. Coming from the Oxford English Dictionary of 1755 and 1756, a mistress was defined as 1. A woman who governs, correlative to subject or servant. 2. A woman skilled in anything. 3. A woman teacher. 4. A woman beloved and courted. 5. A term of contemptuous address, or, the most eloquent of all, 6. A whore or concubine. Shockingly, none of these definitions actually reference the marital status of the mistress. It was not until the advent of Miss that Mrs. gained the association with marriage. Miss was actually used as a way to more formally address young girls, which we still use today. It was not explicitly used for adult women for quite a long time. The appearance of it being used to describe adults coincided with a significant rise in the population of London in the mid-1700s. Everyone from the genteel marriageable daughters, women of business, and the women of public occupations all shared the title Mrs., leading to confusion about what the honorific actually meant. It's not known exactly what led to the rise of Miss, meaning an unmarried adult woman, but the leading theory that I found was the distinction was stolen from French. In French, you have the terms dame and demoiselle, meaning a married woman and single woman respectively. At the time of the split, the women in the upper echelon of London society had been taught French in their genteel girls' schools. The theory claims that the knowledge of this French concept and the desire to distinguish the genteel from the common riffraff led to the introduction of Miss as a distinction in marriage status between honorifics. This was likely compounded by the Industrial Revolution, where many men began working in factories, and the ones back home wanted to know who was and wasn't sexually available. Thus, Mrs. came to mean a married woman and Miss to mean an unmarried woman. With the normalization of Mrs. solely meaning a married woman, we see the rise of the quote-unquote Mrs. Man phenomenon. Women began taking their husbands' last names as a consequence of coverture, aka the wife is under the husband's protection and authority. It was commonplace to say Mrs. her first name, his last name, but that began being simplified to Mrs. his last name to signify which woman belonged, to which man specifically. She would be dubbed Mrs. his first name, his last name, which is the Mrs. Man we've all come to know and despise. The earliest example that's commonly cited is Jane Austen's use of Mrs. Man in Sense and Sensibility. Austen calls Mrs. John Dashwood as such to distinguish her from her mother-in-law, who would have also been a Mrs. Dashwood. Finally, Ms., M-I-Z, comes into play. 2 whole centuries later, in the 1960s and 70s, and their associated wave of feminism, the honorific Ms. came into use by several prominent feminists of the time who wished to distinguish themselves as individuals outside of the context of marriage. While it has caught on in the mainstream, Ms. also developed a context of radical feminism because why would a woman not want to be referred to by marriage status unless she's a radical atheist, anarcho-communist, blue-haired, pronoun-using feminist? This isn't the whole story, of course. The full evolution of Mrs., Miss, and Ms. is very, very complex, and I definitely won't be able to explain it as eloquently as Amy Erickson. I suggest checking out her book, Mistresses and Marriage, or A Short History of the Misses, if you have a chance. So, other than the obvious link to the feminist movement seen with Ms., what other feminist ideas relate to these honorifics or their use in the English language as a whole? Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm going to focus on 3 prominent feminist authors, in particular Simone de Beauvoir, Luce Irigaray, and Judith Butler. In her book Le Deuxième Sexe, aka The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir says that a man is defined as the default human, while women are considered secondary. Put another way, a woman is an assortment of things, while a man is anything but those things that would make him a woman. This is useful for us because it forces us to wonder why that is, which is where Irigaray comes in. Phallogocentrism is incredibly hard to explain, probably because I don't fully understand it, but I digress. It comes from the words phallus and logocentric, together meaning the privileging of the masculine in the construction of meaning. By my understanding, phallogocentrism is a concept that says that the English language is created by men, and therefore cannot possibly be used to represent women accurately. The 2 primary examples of this are the invisible woman and appropriate language. The invisible woman is language that ignores girls and women by including man or some equivalent. For example, we have words like fireman, mankind, brotherhood, and notably, all men are created equal. Man can include women, of course, but let's flip these words around. Firewoman, womankind, and sisterhood. They have a very specific and clear image of a woman, not just humans as a whole, which is what we also saw with Beauvoir. Appropriate language is simply language that society deems appropriate for a person or group of people. For our purposes, it encompasses 2 separate but linked ideas: vocabulary used by the people and the vocabulary used to describe the people. It is a well-known phenomenon that women as a whole are much more comfortable using more descriptive words to describe a color, such as mauve instead of pinkish purple or lilac instead of purple. We see the same thing with exclamations. It's considered unladylike to swear, but when a man does it, he might be considered a damn oaf, but no less of a man than he was. The classic example of specific vocabulary only applying to a certain gender is the use of stud or whore. A woman who sleeps with a lot of men is a whore, but a man who sleeps with a lot of women is a stud. To prove a point, let's flip the words around. So, a woman who sleeps with a lot of men is now a stud. The problem with that is, by trying to view a sexually active woman in a positive light, we've simply just made the woman a man. Basically, phallogocentric appropriate language just traps us in a cycle of trying to define and understand the concept of womanhood in terms of its relationship to its masculine counterpart, never quite being fully explainable or comprehensible without gross oversimplification. You can see this prominently in Matt Walsh's infamous documentary, What is a Woman? But I digress. These examples of English being inherently sexist go to show that this is not a non-issue. The specific honorifics in question undoubtedly have a hand in English's sexism, so it really grinds my gears, boils my water, bends my strings, squeaks my door hinges, and honestly, very frankly, pisses me off when the Explorers podcast vaguely handwaves this very real issue. Now, for some added background, the Explorers podcast is self-described as the podcast that time travels back through history, country by country and era by era, to find out what it was really like to be a woman of the past. With that, let's get into it.
We often think, and I'm guilty of having believed this, that this whole thing is designed by men to subjugate women, burying their individual identity under their name. But that isn't actually true. It wasn't long before people started challenging the notion, as early as the 1840s at, you guessed it, the Women's Rights Convention held in Seneca Falls, New York, which I touched on in our Silent No More episode. I cannot imagine Elizabeth Cady Stanton being down with being called by her husband's full name. But still, the practice hung around in certain circles for a very long time. I've been to a couple of weddings where the couple was announced to the crowd as Mr. and Mrs., man's full name. And if that's your thing, you do you, ladies, but it's something that always confused me. Of course, there have always been varying opinions on all of this. While some women wanted their full and proper names used, others didn't like it at all. In 1953, poet Kathleen Raine made it clear in a newspaper that people were using her first name way too freely, and she'd prefer it if they'd just go with Miss Raine. One William Empson didn't think honorifics were polite at all, and they were often confusing. I do not know whether she is married, single, resuming her maiden name after a separation, or simply offering a pen name, and it is not my business to inquire, he wrote. What would be presumptuous would be a demand to know before even addressing her whether she is Mrs. or Miss. Fair enough, William. So no matter what you go by, Miss, Mrs., Ms., none of the above, you can be sure that none of them were born out of the need to define a woman by her relationship status. They were meant to tell the world that we had power.
The Exploress claims that the honorifics scheme that we see today wasn't explicitly designed by men to subjugate women. Therefore, we don't need to worry about it. To quote her directly, they, the honorifics, were meant to tell the world that we had power. I will say, she is correct that this is not what they were meant to do, but that is obviously not how they are or even were used. Imagine you see a person's name written down, and it's Mrs. Henderson. Relatively accurately, you can assume that they're married, their spouse is likely a man, Henderson is not their original last name, and they go by she/her pronouns. Now, this is obviously not the case 100% of the time, but because of how we are trained by society to understand these honorifics, we can't say that these titles are used to empower anyone modernly. The honorifics weren't designed to subjugate at the time, but became tools of subjugation because of the times. I simply cannot agree with the idea that the honorifics were meant to empower women when they do the exact opposite. So, in summary, Mrs., Ms., and Miss all have a storied and interesting history, and there are a lot of complicated ideas associated with them. But what's the point of this whole podcast? Simply, we should not turn a blind eye to the role that these honorifics have played in the subjugation of women, as some are inclined to do. It is a fact that Western society is incredibly masculinely focused. We can see it in things like how women are 47% more likely to be seriously injured in a car crash due to safety features being designed for men. While the honorifics in questions did not cause this problem, they are indicative of a much larger problem. Not only should we strive to fix our language and make the biases associated with honorifics a thing of the past, but we should look at the history and learn from it so that we can prevent forms of subjugation before they happen. Thank you for listening. I've had a great time this semester talking about everything under the sun, from Andrew Tate to goofy shenanigans. I hope that you've learned something new and take this knowledge with you. With that being said, I'm gonna make like a banana and lie around unused, gradually festering until I attract fruit flies. See ya.